I'm going to ask some profound questions this morning, but I'm going to take my clothes off. I'm going to actually, don't worry, I will still have clothes on. But I've been on the road for 3 weeks, and I literally flew in from the Galapagos last night. And when I packed 3 weeks ago, I thought, okay, I'll just put a bunch of stuff in there, and I'm giving a graduation speech in Chicago tomorrow. So I wore my professional clothes, but mostly I brought my Galapagos and Machu Picchu clothes and things like that. And I brought nothing in between. And this is like an appropriate in-between like attire moment. So I'm just going to take this off, if that's okay. Yeah? Okay, well, sure. Because if the subject matter is about emotions, we might as well see what's underneath the surface, right? So I'll try to do this quickly. I don't know about you, but for me personally, yeah, I've never given a speech while I was taking the clothes off at the same time. You have to go to speaking school for this kind of stuff. Okay, so yeah, there's someone with a camera right here. It's live TV. Oh, that, yeah. Well, these are shorts. Okay, there we go. Oh, look at how messed up these pants are. Oh my God. So, this will be on YouTube. All right. Long story short is this. How do you take seriously someone up here on stage doing this right now? No, the long story short is that we do wear our own version of a suit when we show up in the workplace. And so many of us, almost there, so many of us find the suit quite confining. And we find that ourselves, what's happening underneath the suit isn't really available to us because we've actually lost track of what's underneath there. What I'm going to talk about today, let me put this on. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good. That was the hard part of my presentation. From here on, it's really easy. So what I've learned in 25 years of being a CEO and starting with a small company and growing it into a big company is that we as leaders are the emotional thermostats of the groups that we lead. There's a lot of data that shows that 50 to 70% of how a group feels about the group has to do with how they feel about the leader and how they think the leader feels about the group. Well, what I'm going to talk about today is our emotions. And for some of you to say, oh God, let's not go there. The truth is, as Carl Jung said, what we're unconscious to has power over us. And if we don't understand what's happening underneath the surface, it's going to come out on the surface. So I'm going to tell you my story. Today's talk is really sort of the story of 2 economic downturns, 2 Jewish shrinks, and 2 goys named Chip. So let's get started. I love this man, Abe Maslow. Some of you who know me a little bit know that I've been devoted to him. In the last downturn, 10 years ago, our company was in a lot of trouble. My company's called Joie de Vivre. Joie de Vivre Hospitality, the 2nd largest boutique hotelier in the US now. 10 years ago, we were only in the Bay Area. We were in a lot of trouble. And one day when I was really quite depressed as the CEO of the company, I went to the local bookstore looking for a business book and realized within about 5 minutes I should be in a different section of the bookstore called the self-help section. And that's how I ended up getting reacquainted with Abe Maslow's work. And this man helped me to bring goodness in the quest for greatness. And how do you bring goodness, humanistic psychology, into an organization at a time when the organization is really at its survival needs? And I'll just say a couple things. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, 5 levels, physiological needs at the base, self-actualization at the top. Meant a lot to me because I sort of saw my company, starting a company, calling it Joy of Life, was my form of self-actualization. We took that 5-level pyramid, turned it into a 3-level pyramid, the transformation pyramid of survival, succeed, transform, sort of the paradigm for life. Anything you do in life can come back down to these 3 levels. And then we applied it to our 3 most important stakeholders, our employees, our customers, and our investors. And most importantly, on the employee side, we really started asking quite profound questions about how do we create meaning and a sense of meaning within an organizational construct at a time when people are fearful for their jobs. And I really, using this model and the wonderful heart in the middle, that sort of is the business model that defines how we do business. We tripled in size during a really difficult time during the dot-com bust. And I learned that Maslow's hierarchy of needs in psychology can have a rather powerful effect on leadership, on how you lead and how you create a culture. Okay, so that was that, and actually the heartbeats. Very cheesy. So that was the last downturn. Now we're in this downturn. And we're about 4.5 years into this downturn, depending upon how you look at the math. Last downturn, it was about meaning organizationally. This downturn, it was really about meaning personally. 4 years ago, in the first quarter of 2008, my book, Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow, that talked about that last slide, had come out September of 2007. It was really apparent that there was a thirst in the organizational world for learning about applying that classic theory of psychology to business. And I was giving lots of speeches, and I loved writing the book, but I was still the CEO of this company with 3,500 employees while I was doing that. And what was becoming progressively more clear to me in the first quarter of 2008 is that I didn't want to be CEO anymore. It's like, okay, it's the high-class problem. But it really wasn't. I mean, at that point in early 2008, it was very clear we were running out of money again as a company, and I was running out of money personally. But I had a lot of other existential issues going on in my life, a long-term relationship ending, not by my choice, a son going to San Quentin prison wrongfully, and he was there for 8 months until a federal judge let him out and said the man's innocent. But having your son in San Quentin prison for 8 months when he's innocent is really, really painful. But mostly I was having that profound mourning pain in my heart and soul when I'd get up and I'd say, I'm not the right person to be doing this anymore. My company that I'd founded and grown needed somebody other than me, and yet I felt quite handcuffed and in a bit of a prison by my sense of identity of being the CEO and my sense of obligation and responsibility. So I started reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. How many of you have read the book? Wow, yeah. I mean, it's an amazing book. And if you're having a bad day, read that damn book. Because you'll realize you're really not having that bad of a day. You're not in a concentration camp. For those who don't know Viktor Frankl's work, 1930s psychologist in Vienna, Austria, who had a basic premise that what fuels us in life is meaning. And then, ironically, he ended up in a concentration camp. He was Jewish. And in a concentration camp, he got to see his theory in practice. Who lived, who didn't, is meaning the fuel of life. And then he got out and he wrote about it. And it's a great book. So I'm reading this book and thinking, okay, I'm not in a concentration camp. I'm not in a prison like my son. But I actually feel like I'm in an invisible prison and handcuffs because I absolutely didn't like what I was doing. And I felt like, wow, at this point, what this company needs is somebody who's at the top of their game. So on April 30th, 2008, I was in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was giving a speech to a group there about peak and self-actualization, and I wasn't feeling all that self-actualized at the moment. I was about to give the speech. It was about 30 minutes beforehand, and I got a call from the CEO of our insurance broker, and he wanted to talk to me about, actually, let me tell you, before I say that, let me say this. Part of the reason I loved Viktor Frankl's book was because of this quote. And when we think about our emotions, think about this quote. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Wow. He wrote that after being in a concentration camp. We have stimulus in life, and then we tend to not just have response, we actually have reaction. We don't create a lot of space between stimulus and response because we have reaction. So what I was trying to learn in early 2008 is how not to be reactive, how to actually help my emotions not get the best of me. Isn't that an odd phrase? My emotions got the best of me, as if our emotions are some evil twin lurking inside, ready to take over us at the most challenging times in our lives. No, I instead was sort of saying, okay, how do I learn how to respond emotionally and create a space and create some freedom in the process? So I'm in St. Louis, back to that story, and I was about to go on stage in about a half an hour, and I got this call on my cell phone from the CEO of our insurance brokerage company talking to me about this guy. Now, that's not me, but that's my friend Chip Hankins, a high school picture of him, who was one of my closest friends. He was my closest Chip friend in the world. And he was a guy he was our insurance broker, he was our insurance agent for 12 or 13 years. But more importantly for me, if I was having a rough day, or if he was having a rough day, we'd call each other up and we'd go for a long hike and we'd talk. And he was a very reflective guy. But on April 30th, 2008, I got a call from his CEO right before I'm going on stage telling me that Chip had taken his own life. Chip had committed suicide. And he was the first of 6 friends of mine who have actually taken their lives in the last 4 years, who were not able to create the space between stimulus and response. 4 of the 6 were entrepreneurs. 3 of those 4 were in the wellness space, doing entrepreneurial work and making the world a better place, while they were inside crumbling because their sense of identity was so attached to their company. And 2008 through 2010, so many of those companies were on the way down. And isn't it interesting that the word we use for an economic downturn, the worst of economic downturns, depression, is the same word we use to describe a personal, emotional downturn? So unfortunately, Chip took his own life. And I was in a place where I had been imagining that myself, not even close to doing it, taking any steps that direction. So it was very strange. A month later, he lived in New Zealand with his wife and 2 kids. They'd moved there because his wife was Kiwi, and Kiwi, just like you. We had the memorial service for him in the Bay Area about a month later, and it's a very interesting experience going to a memorial service for your friend who commits suicide. Hard if you've ever done it. You know, it's just difficult. You have this sense of responsibility on some level. Harder still when they have the same weird name that you have. Harder still if you're depressed yourself and everybody's going up and giving their Chip stories, and you're sort of wondering, okay, you know, I hope I can create a space between stimulus and response when I get to that stage. So I decided that I would learn more about Viktor Frankl's book. I said I need to learn more about this. And then a month later, I broke my ankle playing baseball. That ankle, I had a cut on my leg that I didn't know I had on my leg that became a bacterial infection because I had fertilizer in my leg. And I almost had my leg amputated. And then I was in St. Louis again on antibiotics, really strong antibiotics, on crutches, giving a speech about self-actualization. And it was August of 2008. And at the end of my speech, I went flatline. I died. I died on stage. No one ever wants to die on stage. Maybe break a leg on stage, but not dying on stage. But I did. I actually died. Fortunately, I went unconscious first. They had paramedics show up. And 1 minute after the paramedics showed up and they had heart monitors on me, I went flatline, the first of 9 times going flatline over the next 90 minutes. So I lived, obviously. I'm here today. But interestingly enough, what was in my briefcase or my book bag, my backpack, when I was after being in the emergency room, was Viktor Frankl's book. And so I decided, okay, Viktor, I'm supposed to actually listen to you. How do I take man's search for meaning and make it relevant to my life on a practical day-to-day basis? And I decided to turn it into what I call an emotional equation. And here it is. Despair equals suffering minus meaning. And I promise you, for those thinking, oh, this is so depressing, I'm going to get to some happier emotions soon. But stay with me for a moment. Despair equals suffering minus meaning. Suffering, if you're a Buddhist, it's the first noble truth of Buddhism. Suffering's ever present. If you are in a concentration camp, suffering is ever present. If you are in a prison like my son was, suffering is ever present. If you are a CEO of a company and wedded to an identity you don't want anymore, suffering is ever present. If you're in a bad marriage or no marriage, suffering is ever present. If you're in a bad job or no job, suffering is always there if you want to find it. The constant in this sacred algebra is meaning. And meaning, as you increase meaning, you decrease despair, if suffering's a constant. Now, some of you in the audience, I hate math. I get it. I don't like math either. Math is about relationships. You usually think of it as the relationship of numbers. But what I want you to ponder right now is, what if math was about the relationship of emotions? So this equation, despair equals suffering minus meaning, became my lifeline on a daily and sometimes hourly basis to try to reacquaint myself with what's the meaning in life for me. How did I do that? Well, I'd come home from a bad day or a bad week, and I'd do an emotional inventory. There's a study that was done long ago where they studied widows. Widows, 2 sets of widows. One set of widows that actually had their formative years in the Depression, in the emotional boot camp of depression, of the economic depression. They were teens in the Depression. And the other set of widows who did not grow up during the Depression. What they found is that the widows who actually grew up during the Depression were much better able to handle being a widow, being self-reliant, independent, courageous, because they learned some emotional muscles back during the Depression long ago. So I started asking myself on a daily basis, what emotional muscles am I learning during this emotional boot camp? And I would write down authenticity, vulnerability, humility, courage, and then I would even imagine, how is that going to serve me later? Amazingly, as I spent more time focusing on the meaning, the despair started going down. November of 2008, we were having our annual management retreat of our top 80 managers in the company, and I was supposed to get up and give a cheerleading speech to tell them, rah, 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 2009 is going to be a great year. And I knew that was a bunch of BS. But my senior team said, you got to go up and give a cheerleading speech. So I'd sort of written a cheerleading speech, and 5 minutes before I got on stage, I looked out in the audience and I saw my friends, the people I worked with, and I just felt suffering. And so I threw the speech away. In November 2008, I went up on stage and I said, Abe Maslow's family gave me his diaries for the last 10 years of his life. And in his diaries, Abe Maslow talks about the fact that people, great leaders and great organizations, create great psycho-hygiene. And what he meant by that, psycho-hygiene, is he means that when we're going through the sweatbox of life, and in the sweatbox of being in an organization that's going through trouble, we are, as leaders, responsible for creating a catharsis, or a figurative experience of bathing together. How do we get a group of people who are going through an anxiety-producing time to work together and to shower together, not literally, and to feel a sense of catharsis as a result of that. So that's what I figured. I said, listen, this is a big experiment, but I've thrown away my speech, guys, and I'm going to just go to the easel right now, and I'm going to write an equation, this equation, that I want to talk about, and I want to spend the next hour talking about how we're going to find meaning in the worst of economic times. This is a collection of managers who had created budgets for 2009 for the owners for whom the hotels that we manage, that said that our revenues were going to go down about 2 or 3% in 2009, which we knew was wrong. As it turns out, in the hotel markets that we were in 2009, revenues for the markets went down 22%. Our budgets assumed 2 to 3%. These managers knew the budgets were BS, and they needed to have this sense of how we're going to make meaning at a time where every single month we're going to get beat up for not making our budget. So the next hour was all about catharsis. And people cried, people laughed, but more importantly, they let down their guard, they took off their suit, they allowed themselves to be relatively emotionally naked, and what came from that was intensely profound and was a sort of a moment of quite, really sort of a moment of reckoning for our company. After the talk, someone came up to me, all three of these people who came up to me were guys, interestingly enough. The guys sort of like the emotional equations. They like that, that logical stuff. Guy came up to me and said, "Do you have an equation for jealousy?" I said, "Not really." And then someone else came up and said, "Do you have one for anxiety?" And then someone came up and asked, "Do you have one for happiness?" And that was when I said, okay, wow. This emotional equation was my way of just staying alive, but maybe there's something to it. And so I started wanting to learn more about emotions. And so while I was trying to guide my company to a better place, I decided to do a PhD in emotions. And I went out and I studied a bunch of emotions. First of all, I studied with Isaac Newton. I didn't stay with Isaac Newton. I am old, but not that old. I studied Isaac Newton's color wheel. Red plus blue equals purple. None of you went to art school, clearly. But what I didn't know is there's this guy named Dr. Robert Plutchik who'd created an emotion wheel 30 years ago. So I had all these emotional equations. I'm thinking, oh, this is just like stupid like campfire stuff that you do. Like, let's make up an equation by the campfire and it's all fun. No, in fact, the psychology profession had been doing this for 30 years, but nobody knew about it. He created this emotion wheel. Up here, you can see joy plus anticipation. There's a little thing here, equals optimism. So long story short is, there was a history of the psychology profession talking about the fact that our emotions, that internal weather we have, we're all familiar with the external weather, and here in Boulder, the barometric pressure plus the humidity plus the elevation is going to create a weather system. That's what's going on inside of us. We have internal weather systems, and it's a combination of ingredients that lead to jealousy or anxiety or happiness. So I figured, I learned despair, now I want to learn happiness. So where do you go to learn happiness? Not Disneyland. So I went to this place. I said in April of 2009, I was fortunate enough to be able to go spend a week with the Prime Minister of Bhutan, the Gross National Happiness Index folks in Bhutan, and I wanted to understand how do they take something as ephemeral as happiness and create the conditions for it to exist in the country. Because for 40 years, that's what Bhutan's been doing, and now there are 52 countries in the world, not including the US, that actually use GNH as a metric for success as a country. So after being in Bhutan for a week, I came back with an equation. And it goes back to another Jewish guy, another Jewish writer in 1954 who said, happiness is not about having what you want, it's about wanting what you have. What does that mean? So the equation, the numerator of the equation is wanting what you have. Best way for me to describe wanting what you have is to appreciate and have gratitude about what you already have in your life. Not the more of what you want to get, which is sort of the bottom of the equation, but it's actually appreciating what you do have, or better yet to say, how to practice gratitude. 4 different continents have actually done a study to ask what's the fastest way for an unhappy person to feel happy. On all 4 continents, the data showed the fastest way to feel happy is to practice gratitude. And it's not just about feeling gratitude and not expressing it, it's actually the feeling of it and then the expressing of it, because actually just feeling it alone without expressing it is like wrapping a birthday gift and not giving it to someone. So practicing gratitude in the numerator. The denominator is having what you want. Now what the hell does that mean? Having what you want. Well, it means I want that over there, and I'm going to go over and pursue it. I pursue it. I pursue the gratification of going and getting it. And I have to say, as a type A entrepreneur, I love pursuing. That's what I sort of have spent my life doing quite often, is going out and pursuing the next thing. But then when you finally have gotten it, it's sometimes not as meaningful. Or doesn't mean, it's like, oh, okay, well that was okay, but now I want that again. We do this with relationships, right? Marriages sometimes. We do it with our goals. The pursuit of happiness is a basic indelible right of us in our Declaration of Independence in this country. But if you look at in the dictionary under the word pursuit, you will see in some dictionaries the definition of pursuit is to chase with hostility. Do we pursue happiness in that fashion? At the mall at Christmas time? I think we do. Happiness equals practicing gratitude. So I just learned, how do I practice gratitude a little bit more often? The way I did it in the context of leadership, because I wanted to say this is not just to talk about Chip and his emotions. This is to talk about all of us in terms of how do we make these equations and these emotions work for us in business. I just made a habit. I said twice a day, I need to go out and practice gratitude to somebody in the company. I need to do it in person, spontaneously and authentically, twice a day. If I don't do it on Monday, I need to do 4 on Tuesday. If I don't do it on Monday or Tuesday, I do 6 on Wednesday. And that was my habit, my new habit. And it was a habit that made me feel good, but most importantly, it made other people feel good too. This was the next equation that I actually tackled because I was feeling a lot of anxiety. Everybody in this room has had an experience with anxiety. Between 2008 and 2012, if you are an entrepreneur, you had a lot of experience with this emotion. What I learned from the experts, and on all these cases I went out and talked to the experts in the field, and what I learned from the experts in anxiety is that anxiety has 2 components. It's what you don't know, uncertainty, and what you can't control, powerlessness. And it's not a plus, it's a times, because it's combustible. So once I knew that, what did I do with it? We started teaching anxiety, what we called anxiety balance sheets in the company. We actually would sit down, 40 people in a room, and we do the following. And you can do this yourself if you want. Think of something that's making you anxious. Create 4 columns. First column is, what is it that I do know about this thing that's making me anxious? The second column is, what is it that I don't know about what's making this thing that's making me anxious? Both of those relate to uncertainty. Column 3 is, what is it that I can influence? And column 4 is, what is it that I can't influence? So column 1 and 3 are the assets. What do I know and what can I influence? Columns 2 and 4 are what don't I know and what can't I influence? What's interesting, and we've done this now with over 1,200 people, is when people sit down and actually put the anxiety on paper, 75% of us have more items under columns 1 and 3, the assets, what we do know and what we can influence, than we do under column 2 and 4. So when we get it down on paper, actually, it isn't quite anxiety producing. But most importantly, look at column 2. What is it that I don't know? There may be somebody out there who who does know the answer, and you should ask them. It could be your boss. It could be your husband or wife or partner if you think they're having an affair. It could be your son if you think he's actually doing some serious drugs. We don't tend to ask the question because we're scared of the answer sometimes, or we're scared of even asking the question. But there's another fascinating psychology study that you may have heard of, where they took a group of people in the room, and they said, before you leave this room, you have 2 choices. You can either get a shock now, and it's going to be twice as painful, but you get it over with, or sometime in the next 24 hours, you can get a shock that's twice as painful. That is that is half as painful, sometime in the next 24 hours, a shock that's half as painful, but it'll happen randomly. So think about it for a moment. You have a choice. Twice as painful now, get it over with, or randomly half as painful sometime in the next 24 hours. How many of you would choose, get the pain over with now, I'll have the pain now? How many of you would choose, I'll take the pain later, half as painful? So you're just like 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 of us would get it over with. What does that tell us as leaders? It says if you have bad news to give, most of us find psychological pain to be more painful than physical pain. People want to hear the news before actually creating more anxiety. So let's learn how to actually package the information and have a real conversation about it so that anxiety doesn't become contagious. Last equation I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to just sum up. Thriving. Barbara Fredrickson wrote a book called Positivity a few years ago, great book. She was able to show what we all know is that you sometimes get in a negative spiral, downward spiral, and everything that could go wrong seems to be going wrong, and that's what my life felt like a few years ago. So what she was able to show is there's an upward spiral too. And it's actually sort of the momentum, the domino effect can actually be positive. And she was able to show that it's a 3-to-1 ratio. That once you get an organization or an individual to a place where you're actually having a 3-to-1 ratio of the positive to the negative, that you start getting into a positive upward cycle or spiral. So we created a whole new approach to how we ended our executive committee meetings in our company. You could do this, it doesn't cost a dime to do it. We would have a weekly executive committee meeting, top 15 people in the company, and those meetings, 2-hour meetings, were really painful back in 2008, 2009, lots of bad news. We decided the last 10 minutes of the meeting, okay, what we're going to do is come to the meeting with someone to recognize, someone in your department, someone in the company, you know, a bellman, a housekeeper, a bartender, somebody who deserves some extra recognition, and tell the story. And so we'd take 10 minutes to do that. And then we'd hear the story, and another person in the room from a different department would go out and say thank you to that person. 3 things came out of this. Number 1 is we ended our meetings on a positive note, which if you're going through really difficult times, be careful that your meetings are 95% about problems. And you know, how do you actually introduce some of your mission back into those meetings? Number 2 is whoever gets out there in the field gets thanked and gets some gratitude, gets some recognition. They're like a positivity ripple all around them for the next couple of days. That affects the other employees, customers, but also their family at home. But thirdly, the fact that we actually had somebody from a different department, from like someone from marketing, go say thank you to someone in operations, all created this, you know, a non-silo environment where people actually sort of were across departments getting along. Let me just sum up by saying this. For 24 years, I was a chief executive officer. I started a company, grew it, it got to, you know, it's now over 5,000 employees. That company almost killed me because I was so focused on executing. I was so focusing on being an executive. And yet underneath that executive, underneath that suit, was this human being full of emotions. And one of the things we all have in common is we have emotions in common. And yet, the higher you get in leadership, the more often you feel like you somehow have to be beyond your emotions. Well, what I've learned after 24 years of being a CEO is that chief executive officers are really chief emotions officers. And I know that sounds rather glib, but it's relevant because we are the emotional thermostats for those we lead. And if we don't have some clue about what's going on internally around our emotions, we're going to have a hell of a time being able to actually create an environment where the petri dish of our organizational culture is a positive one. 3 pieces of data that just sort of back this up. First of all, Daniel Goleman, you're all probably familiar with the book he wrote 17 years ago. The facts were really clear. 17 years ago, what he said was 2/3 of the success of organizational leaders has to do with their EQ, their emotional intelligence, and only 1/3 has to do with their IQ or their level of experience in their work. So emotional intelligence is important. Number 2 is very, very smart man looking smart. There he's looking a little more crazy. But the bottom line is when we're actually in that crazy state and we make decisions from that crazy state, we are making decisions with our amygdala. The amygdala is the base part of our brain, it's the caveman part of our brain, it's the fight or flight part of our brain, and it's the dumbest part of our brain. It's smart in the sense that it actually reads emotions, but it's not all that logical. And what Matt Lieberman, a neuroscientist at UCLA, has proven is that when we make decisions from that state of the amygdala and emotional reactivity, as opposed to Frankel's stimulus, space, response, when we make those decisions from the reactive state of our brain, and we're using the amygdala, not the prefrontal cortex, we lose 10 to 15 IQ points in the process of making decisions. And for some of us in the room, losing 10 to 15 IQ points when we're making decisions is a very dangerous proposition. So just even naming the emotion you feel, Matt Lieberman, the neuroscientist, said, just even saying to yourself, I feel anxious right now. I feel disappointed. I feel jealous. Just even naming the emotion or even getting the equation for it takes you to this part of your brain, and you have a little more IQ to work with. Beautiful pond. An organization is like a pond. And yet, an organization can look like that. And many of us know cultures of organizations that used to be that and became that. And it's partly because our emotions are contagious. And they're just as contagious as the flu. And unfortunately, many leaders don't take that into account when they actually make decisions, and how they make decisions that are going to be painful, and then how they communicate it, and then how they actually create an environment where people as a group can have that psycho-hygiene and that catharsis. So we as leaders just have to know that if we're going to be going out and trying to change the world, we have to start with our organizations and ourselves, and we have to start with the emotions of what's happening in our pond. The most neglected fact in business is that we're all human. And I never went to emotions school, and I don't think you did either. But the most profound way I think a leader can make a difference to those they lead is to really deeply understand what's happening underneath the surface. And if you can do that well, and if you can really actually spend some time understanding your emotions, you're going to be shocked at the impact, especially the higher you are in leadership. You'll be shocked at the impact you have on the people you're leading and on the organization as a whole. So thanks for letting me get naked with you. For those of you who came in later, yeah, I used to be wearing a suit up here, but I took it off. Ted, I just love what you've done. I love LOHAS, and I love that, yes, thank you. Give him a hand. Yeah. So thank you very much.